Jersey Devil Lives in Pine Hollow. Chapter 1. Whispers in the Pines. Rebecca James turned the steering wheel of her old Jeep sharply to the left, its tires crunching on the gravel beneath. She took a deep breath as the familiar yet foreboding forests of Pine Hollow began to envelop her. The trees, dense and tall, seemed to whisper secrets amongst themselves, swaying ever so gently as though nodding to a rhythm only they could hear. It had been years since Rebecca last visited Pine Hollow, the town she once called home. Most would have considered it a retreat, an escape from the bustle of city life, but to her, it was a cauldron of memories she had tried to forget. She returned now not for nostalgia, but for a story. A journalist by profession, she had heard murmurs about unexplained happenings in the town, strange occurrences that locals were hesitant to speak about. Probably just superstitious nonsense, she mumbled to herself, turning the radio on to drown out her rising anxiety. But instead of the latest pop hits or news, she was greeted by a haunting tune, played on an instrument she couldn't quite recognize, followed by an eerie silence. Rebecca swiftly turned the radio off. The sun was setting, casting long shadows between the pines. As she drove deeper into Pine Hollow, the looming forest seemed to become more oppressive, as though it was trying to close in on her. The road, which should have been familiar, seemed longer and more twisted than she remembered. At a turn, she slowed down when she saw a figure standing by the road. It was an old woman, her face hidden under the shadow of a broad hat. In her hand was a basket filled with what looked like freshly picked herbs. But it was her eyes that caught Rebecca's attention, piercing, almost glowing, filled with an unspoken warning. "Need some guidance, dearie?" The old woman's voice was soft, but there was an undertone that made Rebecca's skin crawl. "No, thank you," Rebecca replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I know the way." The old woman chuckled, a sound that seemed out of place in the quiet of the forest. "The Pine Hollow you remember might not be the one you find," she said cryptically. Before Rebecca could respond, a loud, guttural cry echoed through the forest. It sounded distant yet chillingly close. The old woman smiled, revealing surprisingly sharp teeth. "He's awake. And he remembers you." Confused and disturbed, Rebecca pressed the accelerator and drove away without looking back. As the Jeep put distance between her and the enigmatic woman, she couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. Arriving at Pine Hollow's main square, Rebecca parked and stepped out, attempting to shake off the disturbing encounter. The town was much as she remembered: quaint houses, the old clock tower, and the familiar Pine Hollow Inn. But there was an air of tension. Conversations ceased when she walked by, replaced with hushed whispers and covert glances. It was clear that the once tight-knit community was now fractured with unease. She made her way to the local diner, hoping to gather some information about the strange happenings she'd heard about. But as she pushed the door open, the room fell silent. Heads turned, and eyes widened. It was as if she had walked into a place where she wasn't welcome. Ignoring the stares, she took a seat at the counter. "What can I get you?" The server's voice held a tinge of hostility. "Just a coffee, thanks," Rebecca replied, taking out her notebook. As she sipped the bitter brew, she overheard snippets of conversation from the booth behind her. "Another one last night. Same markings. Won't be long now." Summoning her courage, she turned to address them. "I'm sorry. I couldn't help but overhear." "What happened last night?" The occupants of the booth, a middle-aged man and a younger woman, exchanged glances. After a moment, the woman spoke. "It's not something we talk about with outsiders." Rebecca hesitated, then decided to reveal more. "I grew up here. And I'm here to help, to understand what's going on." The two exchanged another look. The man sighed deeply. "There's been incidents." animals, and even some people, found in the woods. Mutilated. Some say it's wild animals. But the older folks, they think it's him. Him? Rebecca asked, intrigued. The Jersey Devil, the woman whispered, her voice trembling. As Rebecca tried to press for more details, a chilling scream pierced the air. The diner's occupants rushed outside, where they were met with a horrifying sight. In the dim light of the setting sun, a shadowy figure with large wings took flight from the nearby woods, its eerie cry echoing through the pine hollow night. Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine. The legends she heard as a child, the tales that were meant to keep her indoors at night, were they more real than she had ever imagined? As the creature disappeared into the distance and the townsfolk murmured amongst themselves, a realization dawned on Rebecca. She wasn't just here for a story anymore. She was here to uncover a truth that might be darker and deeper than she had ever expected. Chapter 2. Secrets of the Past. The streets of Pine Hollow were alive with whispers the following morning. News of the previous night's sighting had spread like wildfire, and Rebecca couldn't help but feel the weight of 1,000 eyes upon her as she stepped out of the Pine Hollow Inn, the town's most popular lodging. "Morning, Miss James," greeted Joe, the innkeeper, as he swept the entrance. He was a stocky man with a gruff exterior but had always been kind to Rebecca during her visits as a child. "Quite the commotion last night, wasn't it?" Rebecca nodded, her gaze distant. "Yes, it was. Unexpected." Joe squinted, glancing at the surrounding woods, then leaned in closer. "You know, Rebecca, some things are better left undisturbed. Some stories are better left as stories." Before she could respond, a familiar face approached. It was Peter, her childhood friend. The years had been kind to him, refining his boyish charm into rugged handsomeness. But his eyes betrayed a deep weariness. "Becca," he called, his voice a mix of surprise and concern. "Didn't expect to see you here, especially now." She smiled weakly. "Work brings me here. Though I'm beginning to think this was a bad idea." Peter looked around, then motioned her to follow. They walked towards the town's small library, a place they'd often frequented as kids, searching for tales of adventure and mystery. Once inside, Peter whispered, "It's not safe to talk openly. Too many eyes, too many ears." Rebecca frowned. "What has happened to this place, Peter?" He sighed. "A lot. Ever since those incidents began. People are scared, Rebecca. And they should be." She pulled out her notebook. "Tell me everything." He began with tales of livestock disappearing, then escalating to pets, and finally, chillingly, people. Some bodies were found, bearing gruesome marks, while others simply vanished. "But why do they think it's the Jersey Devil?" she asks. Peter hesitated, then pulled out an old photograph from his pocket. It showed a much younger him, Rebecca, and a few other kids, standing in front of the woods. Behind them, barely noticeable, was a shadowy figure with wings. "It's been here all along, Becca." "Watching, waiting," he whispered. She gasped, her memories flooding back. The games they played at the forest's edge, the stories they told, and the eerie feeling of being watched. "We summoned it, didn't we?" she murmured, more to herself than to Peter. He nodded. "Intentionally or not, I think we did." Rebecca felt a pit in her stomach. "But why is it attacking now?" Before Peter could answer, a loud thud echoed through the library. They turned to see an old book fall from a shelf. The cover bore an intricate symbol, one that sent chills down Rebecca's spine. The same symbol had been found at the scenes of the recent incidents. "This isn't just about the Jersey Devil," Peter said gravely. "It's bigger than that. The devil is just a pawn." Rebecca picked up the book, dusting it off. It was a journal, penned by the town's founder. As she flipped through the pages, entries of a pact made with the creature, in exchange for the town's prosperity, became evident. The devil would remain dormant, watching over the town, but in return, a tribute had to be made once every century. And the time for the next tribute was now. Who knows about this? Rebecca asks, horrified. Peter sighed. The town elders. They thought they could handle it, but things are getting out of control. Rebecca shook her head. This is madness. We need to stop it. Peter placed a hand on her shoulder. We will, Becca. But first, we need to understand the pact. And find out who or what is behind the devil. The library's old grandfather clock chimed, its sound echoing eerily. The duo knew that time was of the essence. The next tribute was due, and if not delivered, the consequences would be unimaginable. As they delved deeper into the journal, the day outside darkened prematurely. An ominous fog rolled into Pine Hollow, casting a veil of uncertainty. The town streets, once filled with the sounds of daily life, were now silent, save for the distant, haunting cries of a creature lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. Chapter 3. Rituals and Revelations. The old library was silent except for the occasional rustling of pages. The weight of the revelation pressed heavily upon Rebecca. The pact, the tributes, the lurking terror, it was all too much to comprehend. What do we do now? Rebecca whispered, her voice barely audible amidst the encompassing silence. Peter looked thoughtful. We need to find out more about this pact. And more importantly, how to break it. Rebecca nodded, flipping to the last few entries in the journal. One particular entry caught her eye, a sketch of a stone circle deep within the pine barrens, accompanied by cryptic symbols and a ritual. This might be our way out, she said, pointing at the sketch. If I'm reading this correctly, it's a ritual to appease and bind the creature. Peter peered at the drawing. I've heard of this place. The Stone Circle of Elders. It's deep within the Barrens, a place few venture into. But if this ritual is what we think it is, we need to perform it, Rebecca finished his thought. Night was falling, and the town's curfew was in effect, a measure taken by the townsfolk to avoid being outside during the devil's hunting hours. Rebecca and Peter decided to meet at dawn, equipped for a trek into the heart of the Barrens. As Rebecca lay in her room at the inn, sleep eluded her. The stories of her childhood, once seen as innocent tales, now took on a sinister tone. The cries she'd heard, the fleeting shadows, it all made a terrifying sense. With a deep breath, she closed her eyes, trying to gather strength for the journey ahead. The pre-dawn chill was biting as Rebecca and Peter made their way to the forest's edge. Both were armed with lanterns, and Rebecca had the journal tucked safely in her backpack. The Barrens were known to be a labyrinth, but Peter had managed to procure an old map that marked the stone circle's location. Hours seemed to pass as they trekked deeper into the forest. The dense canopy muted the daylight, and an eerie stillness enveloped them. Every rustling leaf and distant cry put them on edge. As they approached the stone circle's location, a strange sensation began to creep over Rebecca. The very air seemed charged, and a palpable tension hung in the atmosphere. Emerging from the dense trees, they found themselves in a clearing, at the center of which stood the stone circle of elders. Each stone was inscribed with the same cryptic symbols from the journal. At the circle's center was an altar-like stone, stained dark with age. Peter looked around warily. This is it. This is where we can bind the creature. Rebecca opened the journal, skimming the ritual. It says we need to place an offering at the altar and recite a chant. But Peter looked at her expectantly. The offering. It has to be something personal, something that ties us to the creature. They exchanged a glance, realizing the significance. Both of them had interacted with the creature as children, albeit unknowingly. They had inadvertently summoned it, and now they needed to give up something to bind it. After a moment of contemplation, Rebecca removed a locket from around her neck. It had been a gift from her mother, containing a picture of her as a child, standing at the forest's edge. Peter, on the other hand, pulled out the old photograph they had found earlier, the one with the creature lurking in the background. "We're ready," Rebecca whispered, placing the locket on the altar. Peter placed the photograph next to it. With a deep breath, they began the chant, their voices echoing in the stillness of the Barrens. The symbols on the stones began to glow, casting eerie illuminations throughout the clearing. The ground trembled, and a wind rose from nowhere, whipping around them with increasing intensity. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged, the Jersey Devil. Its eyes burned with malice, its wings spread menacingly, and its haunting cry filled the clearing. But as the chant reached its climax, the creature faltered, its cries becoming pained. With a final, resounding word from the ritual, a blinding light erupted from the circle, engulfing the creature. When the light subsided, the devil was gone. The wind had ceased, and the forest was silent once more. Peter and Rebecca, drained and exhausted, collapsed to the ground, relief flooding over them. "We did it," Peter whispered, tears of gratitude in his eyes. Rebecca nodded, clutching the journal close. "We ended the curse." But as they made their way back to Pine Hollow, a nagging thought persisted in Rebecca's mind. They had bound the creature, but what about the entity behind the pact? The force that had demanded tributes and controlled the devil? As they re-entered the town, greeted by relieved and grateful townsfolk, Rebecca knew their fight was far from over. The true puppet master, the dark force behind it all, was still out there, waiting. And she was determined to uncover it. Chapter 4. The Puppet Master's Lair. The celebration in Pine Hollow was short-lived. The immediate threat had been quelled, but the underlying menace remained. Rebecca's discovery had rattled the town's elders, who now convened secret meetings. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more they weren't telling her. Late one evening, an anonymous note slid under Rebecca's door at the inn. It read, "Meet me at Widow's Peak at midnight. All will be revealed." Rebecca felt a shiver down her spine. Widow's Peak was an old watchtower at the town's edge, infamous for tales of hauntings and specters. Yet, her journalistic instincts told her this was a ledge she couldn't ignore. Donning a cloak, she made her way through the quiet streets, feeling the weight of Pine Hollow's history with every step. The winding path to Widow's Peak was bathed in the glow of the moonlight, casting eerie shadows. Reaching the top, she found a hooded figure waiting. "Who are you?" she demanded. The figure lowered its hood, revealing an elderly woman with piercing blue eyes. It was Agatha, one of the oldest living residents of Pine Hollow. Rumors spoke of her having the gift of sight, seeing things others couldn't. "Time is of the essence, child," she whispered. "You've bound the Jersey Devil, but its master remains." Rebecca's heart raced. Who is its master? Agatha looked around warily. An ancient evil, one that predates this town. When the founders made the pact, it was with this entity. It's bound to the very land, feeding off fear and sorrow. She handed Rebecca a tattered map, pointing at a location deep in the Pine Barrens, marked, the Hollow's Heart. "There, you will find its lair." "But how do I confront it?" Rebecca asked, fear evident in her voice. Agatha handed her a small vial filled with a shimmering liquid. "This is moonshade essence. It'll protect you, but only briefly. You must be swift." Rebecca nodded, determination filling her. She would end this, once and for all. The next evening, equipped with the vial and map, Rebecca ventured into the pine barrens, accompanied by Peter. The dense trees seemed more menacing than ever, as if guarding the evil within. Hours into their journey, they stumbled upon an area where the trees twisted in grotesque shapes, their branches reaching out like gnarled hands. At the center of this wicked grove stood an ancient, decrepit chapel, the Hollow's Heart. As they approached, the chapel seemed to come alive. Whispers echoed, shadows danced, and an overpowering sense of dread filled the air. "This is it," Peter murmured. They entered cautiously, the chapel's interior shrouded in darkness. At the far end, illuminated by a single beam of moonlight, was an altar. And upon it lay an ornate book bound in what looked disturbingly like human skin. Rebecca stepped forward, drawn to the book. As she opened it, the pages revealed not words but shifting images. The town's founders making the pact, the terror of the Jersey Devil, and at the center of it all, a shadowy figure manipulating events like a puppeteer. "The puppet master," Rebecca whispered. A chilling laugh echoed. From the chapel's shadows emerged a figure, nebulous, constantly shifting, its true form indiscernible. "You cannot stop me," it hissed. "This town, its fear, its despair, they feed me." Rebecca, mustering her courage, retorted, "Your puppet has been bound, and now, so will you." She uncorked the vial of moonshade essence, throwing it at the entity. The chapel was engulfed in a blinding light, and the creature shrieked in agony. Peter, seizing the opportunity, grabbed the book from the altar. "We need to destroy it." As the moonshade essence's effects began to wane, Rebecca and Peter, clutching the book, ran from the chapel, the creature's enraged cries echoing behind them. Outside, they found a pit, remnants of an old well. Without hesitation, they threw the book in, watching as it sank into the abyss. The forest around them seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The twisted trees straightened, and the oppressive aura lifted. The puppet master's reign was over. Pine Hollow began to heal. People once again walked its streets without fear. The legacy of the Jersey Devil became a distant memory, a cautionary tale for future generations. But for Rebecca, the memories lingered. She had confronted unspeakable evil and come out victorious. Pine Hollow was her home, and she'd protected it at all costs. Yet, late at night, when the world was silent, she often found herself gazing at the pine barrens, wondering if the battle was truly over or if new horrors awaited in the depths of the forest. Chapter 5. Whispers in the woods. The immediate danger had passed, but the days following the confrontation at the Hollow's Heart felt oddly stagnant. Rebecca, hailed as a heroine by Pine Hollow's residents, found the sudden attention suffocating. The incessant gratitude, while sincere, served as a jarring reminder of the horrors she had witnessed. The townsfolk went about their days, attempting to return to a semblance of normalcy. Festivals were held in the town square, children played without fear, and businesses thrived. Yet, the collective memory of the creature that had once terrorized them seemed to linger like a dark cloud. In the midst of this, whispers began to spread. Several residents reported hearing voices deep within the pine barrens, singing a haunting lullaby that beckoned them to enter. Those who ventured into the woods spoke of strange visions, of ghostly figures dancing around bonfires, only to disappear upon closer inspection. Peter, feeling responsible as the town's protector, decided to investigate. He approached Rebecca with a proposal: to delve deeper into the pine barrens, in search of answers. Rebecca, sensing an unfinished story, agreed. Accompanied by Elijah, a woodsman known for his expertise in navigating the pine barrens, the trio set out. The forest greeted them with its typical eerie stillness, but there was an additional layer of tension in the air, a sensation of being watched. Hours into their expedition, The lullaby whispered through the trees, growing louder with each step. It was both mesmerizing and bone-chilling. They followed the sound, which led them to a clearing bathed in moonlight. In the clearing stood an ancient stone circle, with 12 stones, equally spaced and covered in moss and archaic symbols. At the center of the circle was a smaller stone, upon which lay a silver amulet in the shape of a crescent moon. The singing intensified, and ghostly figures began to materialize, dancing gracefully around the stone circle. Their faces, obscured by the soft glow of the moonlight, bore expressions of sorrow. Rebecca, entranced, whispered, "Who are they?" Elijah, his voice shaking, replied, "The lost souls of Pine Barrens." It said they were townsfolk who ventured into the forest, seduced by its secrets, and never returned. The figures' dance grew frenetic, their sorrowful cries filling the air. As they moved, they seemed to beckon the trio to join them. Peter, ever the pragmatist, said, "We need that amulet. I believe it's the key to setting these souls free." Drawing a deep breath, he stepped into the stone circle, his hand outstretched towards the amulet. The moment his fingers touched it, the world seemed to tilt. The ghostly figures paused, their cries growing silent, and the entire forest held its breath. Suddenly, a powerful force propelled Peter out of the circle, the amulet clutched tightly in his hand. The ghostly figures screamed in agony and vanished, leaving the forest in complete silence. Elijah, clearly shaken, muttered, "We've disturbed something ancient, something powerful." Rebecca examined the amulet, its cold silver surface reflecting the moonlight. "We need to find out what this is, its purpose, its power." Peter, rubbing his temples, agreed. "This is bigger than we imagined. We've only scratched the surface of Pine Barrens' secrets." The trio made their way back to Pine Hollow, the weight of their discovery heavy on their shoulders. The forest's lullaby continued to haunt them, a constant reminder of the mysteries that lay hidden within its depths. As they approached the town, a chilling realization dawned on Rebecca. The battle with the puppet master and the Jersey Devil may have been won, but the war for Pine Hollow's soul was far from over. And so, with the amulet as their guide, the trio braced themselves for the challenges ahead, knowing that the true test of their courage and resolve was yet to come. Chapter 6. Unraveling the enigma, the return to Pine Hollow was unlike any other. Whispers grew louder, and an intangible weight permeated the atmosphere. The silver amulet seemed to pulse with an eerie glow, capturing the attention of anyone who glimpsed it. Rebecca, Peter, and Elijah decided to seek answers from the one person in town who might shed light on the artifact, Agatha. With her reputed sight and knowledge of the old ways, she was their best hope. Upon entering her modest abode, they were immediately enveloped in the warm scent of burning sage and cedar. A myriad of symbols, herbs, and curiosities adorned the walls, testimony to Agatha's lifelong study of the occult and Pine Hollow's dark history. Without a word, Agatha gestured for them to sit, her gaze fixated on the amulet. After what felt like hours, she spoke, her voice trembling. "This is the Moonshade Talisman. Legend speaks of its power to bridge our world with the unseen, to unlock the barriers that hold back the spirits of the Pine Barrens." Peter interjected, "Is it dangerous?" Agatha looked up, her piercing blue eyes filled with caution. "In the wrong hands, devastatingly so. It is said that the one who possesses the talisman can command the lost souls, bending them to their will." Elijah, his voice heavy with concern, added, "We saw those souls. They were trapped, tormented. We need to free them." Agatha nodded. "The ritual to release them is intricate and risky. The talisman will guide you, but you must also possess 3 sacred items: the tears of the moon, a feather from the raven of midnight, and the heartwood of the elder tree." Rebecca scribbled furiously in her notebook, eager not to miss a detail. "Where can we find these?" With a deep sigh, Agatha began to recount. The tears of the moon are crystallized dewdrops found only on the night of silenced whispers, which is tonight. They form on the petals of the ghost lily, a rare flower that blooms just once a year in the darkest depths of the pine barrens. The raven of midnight is an elusive creature, a guardian of secrets. To obtain its feather, you must gain its trust or outwit it. The heartwood of the elder tree is perhaps the most challenging. The elder tree is the oldest tree in the pine barrens, its roots intertwined with the very essence of the land. To retrieve its heartwood, one must confront and overcome their deepest fears. Rebecca looked up, determination burning in her eyes. "We'll get these items and perform the ritual. Those souls deserve peace." Agatha placed a frail hand on Rebecca's. "Tread carefully, child. The pine barrens are ever watchful, and not all spirits are benevolent." As night fell, the trio set out. The night of silenced whispers cloaked the town in an eerie quiet, amplifying every rustle and whisper of the wind. Following Agatha's instructions, they first sought the ghost lily. Deep within the forest, a luminescent glade appeared, with ghost lilies glowing ethereally under the moonlight. As Rebecca bent down to collect the tears of the moon, she felt a presence. Looking up, she locked eyes with a spectral figure, a young woman with sorrow-filled eyes, silently pleading for release. Next, they ventured to the rumored domain of the Raven of Midnight. Spotting the majestic bird perched high on a cliff, Peter began to sing an old lullaby, one passed down through generations. The raven, seemingly entranced, slowly descended, dropping a single feather before disappearing into the night. The final trial was the most daunting. The elder tree stood tall and imposing, its gnarled branches casting labyrinthine shadows. As they approached, the ground beneath them seemed to shift, and they found themselves separated, each facing their own nightmarish visions. Elijah faced the ghosts of his ancestors, accusing him of forgetting their traditions. Peter was surrounded by shadows of past foes, their voices mocking his failures. Rebecca stood alone in an infinite void, her deepest fear of isolation consuming her. Drawing upon inner reserves of strength and determination, they each confronted and overcame their fears, emerging stronger and united. At the base of the elder tree, a piece of its heartwood lay, awaiting them. With all three items in their possession, they returned to Agatha, ready to perform the ritual and free the lost souls. Yet, as Pine Hollow's clock tower struck midnight, an ominous feeling settled in. They had unlocked the path to the spirit realm, but what lay beyond was uncertain. And as the boundaries between the worlds began to blur, the true challenge was only beginning. Chapter 7. Between two realms, the heart of Pine Hollow seemed to miss a beat as Agatha, with the trio by her side, began the ritual. The air thickened, the darkness deepening, forming an almost tangible shroud around them. The talisman lay in the center, encircled by the three sacred items, their collective glow forming an otherworldly light. The elderly woman began to chant, her voice haunting yet harmonious. As the cadence grew, the talisman's light intensified, and the ground pulsated with an energy that seemed both ancient and alive. It was as if the very earth sought to bear witness to this convergence of power and intent. Suddenly, the surroundings morphed. Pine Hollow's familiar landmarks faded, replaced by a vast, misty landscape that defied description. It was a realm of silhouettes and shadows, where echoes of the past mingled with glimpses of futures not yet realized. The boundary between life and death had grown thin, allowing passage between worlds. Rebecca clutched her notebook tightly, realizing that they had ventured into the spirit realm, a place whispered about in legends but rarely seen by mortal eyes. Peter, ever the protector, positioned himself between the group and any potential threat, while Elijah muttered a protective incantation passed down through his lineage. From the mist emerged figures, souls trapped in limbo. Their appearance was fragmented, a poignant reminder of lives interrupted and dreams unfulfilled. Among them was the spectral woman Rebecca had seen earlier in the glade, her sorrowful gaze even more profound now. "We seek to free you," Rebecca began, her voice echoing in the timeless expanse. "To give you the peace you've been denied." A collective murmur rose from the spirits, their voices blending into a melancholic symphony. Then, a singular voice emerged from the crowd, strong and clear. It belonged to a tall, regal figure, evidently a leader of sorts in this spectral world. "I am Serafina," she announced. "Once a protector of Pine Hollow, now trapped here by the curse of the Jersey Devil. The talisman was our tether to the living world, our beacon of hope. But it has been lost to us, and with it, our chances of salvation." Elijah stepped forward, showcasing the talisman. "We possess the Moonshade Talisman, and we aim to break the curse binding you here. But we need to know more about the Jersey Devil's intentions and how to confront it." Serafina sighed, a gesture that seemed to ripple through the very fabric of the realm. "The Jersey Devil was once a protector, like me. But its heart grew dark, corrupted by its own power. It seeks dominion over both the living and the dead. Its strength lies in the souls it traps here, each one amplifying its energy. To defeat it, you must weaken its power base, free as many souls as possible, and confront the devil in its own lair." Peter frowned. "And where is that?" "In the darkest depths of the Pine Barrens, where the veil between worlds is thinnest," she replied. Agatha, who had been silently absorbing the surroundings, finally spoke. "We have the items required to free the souls. But confronting the Jersey Devil is another matter. Its power, even in the living realm, is considerable." Rebecca nodded in agreement. "We need a plan. A strategy that plays to our strengths and exploits its weaknesses." Elijah thought for a moment. "The Jersey Devil thrives in darkness and shadows. What if we use the talisman to flood its lair with the light of the living world?" Serafina's eyes lit up. "It might work. The talisman's power, combined with the energy of the free souls, could weaken the devil enough for you to face it." The group felt a renewed sense of purpose. They began the ritual, harnessing the power of the Moonshade Talisman and the 3 sacred items. One by one, the trapped souls were freed, their essence merging with the talisman's glow. As the last spirit found release, the realm started to destabilize. Serafina approached Rebecca, placing a ghostly hand on her shoulder. "Remember, to defeat darkness, one must become a beacon of light." The landscape began to disintegrate, and Pine Hollow's familiar sights returned. But the once tranquil town now bore an ominous aura. A dense fog enveloped the streets, and the cries of the Jersey Devil echoed in the distance, a clear challenge to the group. As the foursome braced themselves for the impending confrontation, they realized that the battle for Pine Hollow's soul had only just begun. Chapter 8. Lair of Shadows. The fog hung over Pine Hollow like a shroud, cold and oppressive, swallowing up the noises of the night. All that could be heard was the distant, mournful cry of the Jersey Devil, like a wounded animal, echoing through the misty void. Each call sent shivers down the spines of the brave group preparing to face the beast. Rebecca, notebook clutched tightly to her chest, sketched the symbols Serafina had shown her in the spirit realm, her hands shaking slightly. These were to be their protection, a barrier against the darkness they were about to confront. Peter, ever watchful, sharpened his knife with a whetstone, his gaze scanning the perimeter for any sign of movement. Elijah, beads in hand, murmured incantations, his voice a soothing balm in the tense atmosphere. Agatha, the most experienced of them all, prepared the ritual site, her movements precise and deliberate. "We need to stick together," Agatha's voice broke the tense silence. "The Jersey Devil will try to separate us, prey on our individual fears. We mustn't let it." Peter nodded. "We go in as a team, and we come out as a team." Rebecca looked up from her sketches. "From what Serafina told us, the lair should be at the heart of the Pine Barrens, where the barrier between our world and the spirit realm is thinnest." Elijah frowned. "That's also where the devil's power will be strongest. We'll need to tread carefully." Using the Moonshade Talisman as their guide, the group ventured deeper into the Pine Barrens. The thick trees loomed over them like silent sentinels, casting long, eerie shadows in the pale moonlight. The fog grew denser with each step, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. Hours seemed to pass as they navigated the treacherous terrain, the talisman's glow their only source of light. Suddenly, Peter held up his hand, signaling the group to stop. Up ahead, nestled between two ancient trees, was an opening, like the mouth of a cave. But this was no ordinary cave. The entrance was marked with symbols that mirrored those in Rebecca's notebook, a clear sign that they had arrived at the Jersey Devil's lair. As they approached, an overwhelming feeling of dread washed over them. The air grew colder, and the oppressive silence was only broken by their own labored breathing and the distant cries of the devil. This was it. The showdown they had been preparing for. Drawing on every ounce of courage they had, the group stepped into the lair. The interior was vast and cavernous, with high vaulted ceilings and walls that seemed to pulse with an eerie blue light. In the center of the cavern was a large stone altar, stained with what looked like centuries-old blood. Surrounding it were hundreds of candles, their flames dancing and flickering in the draught. But what caught their attention the most were the shadows. They moved and writhed, independent of any light source, their forms twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes. Whispers filled the air, echoing the thoughts and memories of those the Jersey Devil had ensnared over the centuries. Rebecca, her heart pounding in her chest, began to recite the incantations from her notebook, her voice clear and unwavering. Peter, knife at the ready, took up a defensive position, guarding the group from any potential threats. Elijah, beads in hand, began his own chant, invoking the protective spirits of his ancestors. Agatha, with the talisman in hand, started the ritual to weaken the devil and banish it once and for all. As they worked in unison, the atmosphere in the cavern began to change. The shadows started to retreat, hissing and recoiling from the combined power of the group. The candles flickered and went out, plunging the cavern into darkness. All that remained was the glow of the talisman, which grew brighter and brighter, casting a protective barrier around the group. Suddenly, with a deafening roar, the Jersey Devil emerged from the shadows. Its form was terrifying to behold, with wings that spanned the width of the cavern, hooves that clopped loudly on the stone floor, and eyes that glowed with malevolent intent. But despite its fearsome appearance, it was clear that the beast was weakened. Using the combined powers of the talisman and their own abilities, the group launched their attack. Peter lunged with his knife, striking at the beast's vulnerable points. Rebecca continued her incantations, her voice rising in intensity. Elijah, beads glowing with a fierce light, called upon the spirits to aid them in their fight. Agatha, her focus unwavering, channeled the power of the talisman directly at the devil. The battle was fierce and intense, with the group giving everything they had. And just when it seemed like the devil might prevail, a blinding flash of light filled the cavern, and the beast let out a final, anguished cry before dissipating into the shadows from whence it came. The group, exhausted but triumphant, took a moment to catch their breath. The lair, once a place of darkness and despair, was now filled with a serene, peaceful light. The shadows had been banished, and the souls the devil had trapped were now free. "We did it," Rebecca whispered, tears of relief streaming down her face. "Yes, we did," Agatha replied, a proud smile on her lips. "But we must remain vigilant. The Jersey Devil may be gone, but there are other evils out there, waiting in the shadows." And as the group made their way out of the Pine Barrens, they knew that their fight was far from over. But for now, Pine Hollow was safe, and they had each other. Chapter 9. Echoes from the past. After the intense confrontation in the Devil's Lair, the town of Pine Hollow breathed easier, believing the terror was behind them. But there were secrets buried deep in the town's history, echoes of the past that refused to be silenced. A week following their battle, Elijah began having visions. Distorted and fragmented, they were glimpses of Pine Hollow from a bygone era. Agatha sensed it first. "The spirits are trying to communicate with you," she said, her face etched with worry. "What they're showing you is important." One particular vision haunted Elijah the most. A group of early settlers, surrounded by thick woods, performing a ritual that had a striking resemblance to the one they had just undertaken. The energy was palpable, a whirlwind of emotions, fear, determination, and a hint of treachery. Peter found a lead in the town's archives. There's mention of a similar incident occurring in Pine Hollow in the early 1700s. The records say the settlers drove a creature out, but it isn't clear how. Rebecca, always the journalist, interviewed the town's oldest residents. She was directed to Mrs. Lorraine, a centenarian with sharp blue eyes, who lived on the outskirts of town. The old woman's hands trembled as she shared a tale passed down in her family. "My great-great-grandmother spoke of a betrayal. One amongst the settlers had consorted with dark forces, hoping to harness the creature's power." As Rebecca relayed this to the group, Elijah's eyes widened in realization. "That betrayal, it's the key. The spirit's messages aren't warnings, they're telling us we've missed something. We may have sent the devil back, but the root of its power, the essence of that betrayal, still lingers." The pieces started to come together. Peter, connecting the dots, realized, so, we dealt with the symptom, but not the disease. Agatha nodded gravely. "And if we don't address the cause, it'll come back stronger." The group decided to retrace the settlers' steps, guided by Elijah's visions. Their path led to the heart of the Pine Barrens, but not to the lair. Instead, they stumbled upon the remnants of what once was a settlement, now buried and forgotten. Amidst the ruins, Elijah was drawn to a spot where the energy felt distorted. Digging, they uncovered a stone tablet with inscriptions eerily similar to Rebecca's notebook. The tablet spoke of a pact, a promise of power in return for loyalty, sealed by the blood of the betrayer. "The root of the curse," Agatha murmured. Rebecca looked at the tablet, her face pale. "The symbols. They aren't just incantations. They tell a story." The story unfolded, revealing the treachery of one of the settlers, Nathaniel, who believed he could control the devil. He betrayed his own, offering them as a sacrifice. But the creature, not one to be tamed, turned on Nathaniel, sealing his fate. Yet, the darkness he invoked remained, embedded deep within the soil, waiting for a chance to rise. "Then our work isn't finished," Peter declared. "We need to break this pact, right its wrong." With Agatha leading, they conducted a ritual at the site. Elijah, as the medium, channeled Nathaniel's spirit. The air grew cold, filled with tension, as they confronted the spirit of the betrayer. Why? Elijah's voice, though his own, echoed with centuries of pain and anger. Nathaniel's spirit, filled with regret, replied, "Power. I thought it could be mine. I was wrong. The group, drawing from the strength of their bond and the lessons of the past, worked to sever the ties that bound the curse to Pine Hollow. As dawn broke, a brilliant light filled the clearing, and they felt a shift, a lifting of the heavy weight that had plagued the town. Yet, as they left the clearing, Peter couldn't shake off a nagging feeling. It's quieter, but the echoes remain. Rebecca sighed. History has a way of repeating itself. But we're here to ensure it doesn't. Agatha, looking at the horizon, stated, "This is but one chapter in Pine Hollow's story. We must remain vigilant." The group left the Barrens, bound together by a shared purpose. They had faced the shadows of the past and emerged stronger. But in the depths of the woods, a whisper lingered, a reminder that every tale has its dark corners. Chapter 10. Whispers in the wind. The days following their encounter in the old settlement were a blur. Pine Hollow was changing. Folks started coming forward with old tales, family stories that painted a picture of the town's tumultuous history. The fear that once held them was slowly fading, replaced by a desperate need for understanding, for closure. Elijah found himself inundated with visions. Spirits, emboldened by the recent events, sought him out, some begging for release, others offering cryptic warnings. It was draining, but there was one vision that stood out, a little girl with raven black hair and piercing blue eyes, standing on the edge of the woods, beckoning him. Rebecca continued her research, digging deeper into Pine Hollow's archives, searching for any mention of the girl. Her search led her to a newspaper clipping dated 1873. The headline read, "Mysterious disappearance of young Clara Barton shrouds town in fear." The accompanying picture was hauntingly familiar, the same girl from Elijah's visions. Peter, inspired by Rebecca's findings, began to map out all the strange occurrences in Pine Hollow over the centuries. A pattern emerged. Every 50 years, an unexplained event would rock the town, and always in its wake, a report of a sighting of a young girl. "That's our next lead," Peter declared one evening. "Whatever happened to Clara Barton, it's linked to the ongoing disturbances. We need to find out what happened to her." With Agatha's knowledge of the spiritual realm, the group devised a plan. They would conduct a séance, reaching out to Clara's spirit, hoping to understand the role she played in Pine Hollow's cursed history. In the old town hall, surrounded by relics of the past, they sat in a circle, holding hands, candles flickering in the dim room. Elijah, once again the medium, began to chant, calling out to Clara. The air grew cold, the candle flames dancing erratically. Then, a hushed whisper filled the room. "Help, me." The voice was soft, filled with pain. Elijah's face contorted, his voice echoing Clara's words. "They took me, into the woods." The man with the twisted smile. "He wants to wake it." Agatha's eyes widened in realization. The devil isn't the only entity tied to Pine Hollow. There's another force at play, older, more sinister. The man with the twisted smile. He's the key. Rebecca, connecting the dots, spoke up. 50 years after Clara's disappearance, there were reports of a smiling man seen near the woods. The same happened a century later. It's a cycle. A gust of wind blew through the room, extinguishing the candles. The darkness was oppressive, suffocating. Peter lit a lantern, its light revealing an old portrait on the wall, a prominent town figure from the late 1800s. The face was familiar, the smile unmistakably twisted. The man was Bartholomew Kane, a wealthy landowner, infamous for his cruelty and obsession with the occult. The pieces fell into place. Clara's abduction was just the beginning. Bartholomew, in his quest for power, had attempted to harness the dark forces beneath Pine Hollow. Over the centuries, his spirit, corrupted by dark magic, had become an entity in itself, ensuring the cycle continued, feeding off the town's fear. "We need to break this cycle," Peter said, determination in his voice. Guided by Clara's spirit, they ventured into the woods. The atmosphere was thick with dread. Elijah, following the pull of the spirits, led them to a clearing. In its center stood a massive stone altar, worn by time, stained with the memories of countless rituals. The wind howled, whispering secrets of old. Shadows danced, as the group, drawing from their shared experiences, began a ritual to free Clara and put an end to Bartholomew's reign. Words of power echoed in the night, the ground trembling, as they called upon the spirits of Pine Hollow, channeling their energy, focusing it on the altar. A scream pierced the night. Bartholomew's spirit, twisted and contorted, emerged, the very embodiment of Pine Hollow's cursed history. "You cannot stop it," he hissed, the shadows around him writhing. But the group was undeterred. Drawing strength from each other, they pushed back, their chants growing louder, drowning out Bartholomew's screams. With a final burst of energy, a brilliant light filled the clearing, consuming the twisted spirit. Silence followed. The weight that had plagued Pine Hollow was lifted. Clara's spirit appeared, her face serene. "Thank you," she whispered, fading into the dawn light. As the group made their way out of the woods, they knew their work was far from over. Pine Hollow's history was riddled with darkness, but with every shadow they confronted, a ray of light broke through, promising a brighter future. But for now, the town would sleep, free from the whispers in the wind. We hope you have enjoyed our storytelling offering tonight. Please be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to be alerted of future weekly additions to our collections. Paranormal Untold Stories.